During the 1970s and 1980s, as John has just pointed out, archaeology in the city revealed plenty of evidence for Roman and medieval and later activity, but it seems very echoey. Is it right? In Saxon London, the mart of many nations described by Bede was strangely elusive. So today I want to show how our understanding of Anglo-Saxon settlement outside the former Roman city of Londinium, and in particular the trading settlement known as Lundenwic, has changed over the past 40 years or so, and especially since recent discoveries at St Martin in the Fields. So here we've got London way over there with St Martin in the Fields, which will be playing a major role in our understanding of its development. And it's at this site, significantly, that the discovery of treasure in the 13th century led to a riot, so probably making it the earliest find spot of Anglo-Saxon artefacts in London. So we're going to have a quick look at the background and then proceed to the development of Lundenwic. Like I said, it was not in the city but in Covent Garden. And as I work for Museum of London Archaeology, I'm mostly going to refer to our excavations, but I will talk about a few others in passing. And I would like to acknowledge here the work of my colleagues, both in and outside Möller, who organise and carry out the field and post-excavation work. So the story starts in the late Roman period when the riverside wall was strengthened between 388 and 402. London was then abandoned by the Romans in 410, and until recently, evidence for late Roman activity was limited to a few sites around the periphery of London. And if you were here last week, you'd have heard about the new evidence from the Blumberg site near the Walbrook. But until then, it's mostly from the extramural cemeteries. Don't know, maybe the angle of the microphones is wrong. Or I'll carry on. The decline in minting and in the importation of and use of mass-produced pottery, together with a lack of other diagnostic artefacts, make it difficult to reliably date deposits of the later 4th and early 5th centuries. In the 1930s, the dearth of Saxon material was such that Sir Mortimer Wheeler suggested that the entire London area was avoided by Saxon settlements, and even today, the only early Saxon stratified finds from a context within the Roman walls are from the Billingsgate Bathhouse site, which you can see there, where a disc brooch with Germanic-style floria across, up there, was found with a couple of pieces of pottery in the demolition debris of the bathhouse, which coin dating shows was in use until after 395 and possibly to 402. Today, however, we can see that the lack of early Saxon finds in the city is really due to the Roman defences and the crumbling ruins of buildings which are alien to the 5th century immigrants. The cemeteries in the upper valleys of the Brent, the Wandle and the Cray around here, and the Darrant, have long been known, but since the 1980s, a number of 5th and 6th century sites have been found both to the east and west of the city, nearly all by the Thames or in river valleys. The Billingsgate brooch is identical to one from the Mitcham Cemetery and to another from a site in Surrey, and together with the pottery types and other finds found in these sites, they reflect the movement of people up and down the Thames and its tributaries from about 450 onwards. And this map is slightly out of date, but you can see the general spread with major sites at Hammersmith, in this area Prospect Park, down at Upper Charles Hill, where numerous buildings have been found. The closest sites to the west of the city are in Aldersgate, where there are 4 sherds of early Saxon pottery found by pre-construct archaeology in the ditch outside the city wall, and on sites in Clerkenwell, on the east bank of the Fleet, up here, where part of a cone beaker like this was found in around this area, and pottery like this was found in deposits underneath the Church of St John, Clerkenwell. And there was also a couple of sherds found over at St Bride's and a dump of late Roman pottery, which was excavated by Professor Grimes in the 60s, but the early Saxon sherds weren't found until the 90s, were identified as such. The pottery fabrics from all these sites are quite distinctive, and they've helped to identify early activity in the area that later became Lundenwic, as we will see. The most distinctive is tempered with a coarse sandstone similar to that found in the Millstone Grit north of the Pennines, which is way too far away to be plausible. And so we think that it was glacially transported south along the former course of the Thames to end up in East Anglia and parts of North London, certainly possibly around Finchley. And another type, which is rarer but found on several sites, includes crushed bone. And then sandy and chaff-tempered wares come later and are more typical of the 6th to 7th centuries. Coming back to the city and the early 1980s, Bede recorded that following the Augustinian missions and conversion of the East Saxons, Pope Gregory decided in 601 that London should be the primary see of England, and that in 604, Aethelred of Kent, who was over-king of England south of the Humber, and uncle of Sabert, who was king of the East Saxons, that there should be a church built in London in which Bishop Mellitus could preach to the East Saxons. There's also a charter of Aethelred of Mercia, which from 693 to 704, which refers to a monastery in the city of London. And in the 8th century, Bede described London as the metropolis of the East Saxons. But the archaeological evidence doesn't support this for such a lot of activity. John Schofield's going to be talking about this in a couple of weeks' time, so I won't carry on. But these pots over here, said to be found near St Paul's, are actually antiquarian finds and have no fixed provenance, so they're not really reliable. The only other finds are from, you can see here, from sites to the south of St Paul's, some found in deposits below the Roman riverside wall. But they're all late 7th to 8th century onwards. And so where was the community that might have used the church built by Aethelred? And the answer lies to the west, near St Martin in the Fields and around there, where, as I said, the first find was probably in 1299. But after this, nothing is mentioned until the 1720s, when at least 2 burials in stone coffins were found at St Martin's, about 14 to 20 feet below ground, during the construction of the portico when the current church was being rebuilt. In one of these was a spear and a palm cup, as you can see on the screen, this one, and another palm cup was found in the ground nearby. In 1775, Maitland recorded great quantities of human bones discovered to the north of this in King Street, although no other finds were reported. The Fettle Lane sword pommel, well known to everybody, was discovered in 1893, and the late 7th or very early 8th century gold ring from Garrick Street was found in 1897. But again, their find spots are not really known, and the significance of these finds wasn't recognised for some time. The real advances were in the 1930s. In 1935, Saxon pottery and loom weights were found at the Savoy by Sir Mortimer Wheeler, and he proposed that there were groups of Saxon buildings between the city and Westminster. And then 2 years later, a complete pot and scattered human bone was found in Drury Lane, and Professor Myers suggested that there might have been a cemetery there. In the early 1960s, substantial remains and numerous artefacts were found at Whitehall. Very poor reconstruction reproduction of it, I'm sorry. But a lot of timber buildings. There's a waterlogged boggy area there, which meant that the wood was preserved. But that was a long time before that was actually published. In 1972, residual sherds of Saxon pottery and another loomway were found at Arundel House near the Savoy, and in the report these are linked to the Savoy finds and the fact that the Strand is on the line of a Roman road. So again, a series of settlements or farms was suggested. And John Hurst followed the same view in his survey in 1976, saying a scattered settlement. And in 1980, Tony Dyson suggested that the Charter of 675, which is the first to mention a port of London, was actually referring to Southwark. But putting all this information together, as John said, Martin Biddle and Alan Vince independently and simultaneously identified the location of Lundenwic in 1984 using surveys of churches, find spots and documentary evidence. And they both proposed two main foci of activity, one in the city around St Paul's and one along the Strand, with the trading settlement in the west. This theory was, the books, this is from John Clarke's book of 1989 and Alan Vince's book, which gives good overview, and subsequent publications, which you can look at and see how things have changed. And the first excavation to confirm the new theories was in 1985, when the discovery of a skull in the JCB bucket on what was supposed to be a watching brief on this site at Jubilee Hall led to a sudden change of tactics, and there was a very short excavation by the Department of Greater London Archaeology, who found a single burial and evidence for buildings and for trade and industry, which was dated from the 7th to 9th centuries. So this brings us to the second part, which covers the development of Lundenwic and Roman to Saxon and burials and the growth and decline of the settlement. So, like most emporia, Lundenwic was strategically located at the border of different kingdoms, the East Saxons, South Saxons, Kent and Wessex. It was near the mouth of the Thames with a good beach for boats. It was linked to the city and the hinterland by at least 2 Roman roads, as you can see, along the Strand and to the north. So it was an ideal port for traders coming, as Bede recorded, by land and by sea. The largest excavation we've had was on the Royal Opera House site, which published 2003, which covered 2,500 square metres. And at this time, the oldest find that we had was this saucer brooch on the top right, and it was thought that activity started in the area of the waterfront and then progressed northwards, and that started there with burials to the north, and that the settlement then expanded over the burials around 670. And to some extent this is still true, but the finds from the excavations shown here, around specifically here and here, point to a much longer chronology. And the first clue came from 2 adjacent sites at the western end of Acre, you can see on the right here, and with a scabbard slide, 3rd century Roman scabbard slide here, and sherds of 5th to 6th century sandstone tempered pottery, like I mentioned earlier, and bone tempered pottery, quite unlike anything else found in Covent Garden, but typical of what we'd already seen in the rural areas. And between 2005 and 2007, the reasons for these unexpected finds were made clearer by exciting evidence for late Roman and early Saxon activity at St Martin in the Fields, not continuous as such, but probably connected by tradition and memory. The work at St Martin's revealed the remains of 1st and 3rd century Roman buildings in the northern part of the site, and a possible tile kiln here in this area, with an archaeomagnetic date of 400 to 450 for the last firing. And the site lies close to suitable clay for tile making and form and stream, so both necessary. And the stream may also have influenced the choice of the site for burials, because there were 4 definite and 2 possible late Roman graves found on the west side of the site, over in this area, and which, together with the sarcophagi found and the portico in that area, and I have to say that there were lots of sarcophagi found, and they were actually all piled up and used to as to consolidate the ground under the portico, because it was even then still quite damp because of the stream. So with this substantial evidence for Roman burials, there seems to have been a religious focus of some form by the 4th century, if not earlier. And the Molar excavations actually found another stone sarcophagus containing a body with a C14 date of 390 to 520 and a likely date of 410. The fact that the skull was missing is probably, the skull missing there, it's probably because of this damage here, which was caused in the 19th century. And the coffin had been reused because it contained bones from the right hand and the right foot from an earlier burial. And another inhumation has a C14 date of 369 to 78, and one to the north end of the site contained a coin of Constantius, 355 to 65, and this one had been cut through at the head end, possibly by a subsequent grave, and the skull from that burial and part of the right shoulder were found in the later cut, together with this substantially complete 5th century pot, which is the most complete of its date in London. It might be an import or it might be a local copy, but it's almost certainly contemporary with the finds from the Billingsgate bathhouse, and like them it demonstrates movement of people up the Thames in the 5th century. Later visits to the St Martin's site are indicated by a mud brick oven found in the northern part of the site, and you can see probably just about make out the brick there. And this has a C14 date of 540 to 600, and to the north, just to the northeast of the pot. And on top of the oven was an imported polychrome bead, you can see at the top, which is of similar date. So the coincidence of 4th century burials and industrial activity on this site is rather difficult to explain, unless the tiles were made for a specific building, such as perhaps a villa, but perhaps more possibly a shrine or temple. Looking at the location of the site, it lies not only at probable crossroads of the Strand, it's rather faint, Strand going this way, and a route coming north-south from Westminster, but also in a sort of triangular area between 2 streams, which come down here and come down there. So in some ways not dissimilar to the Mithraeum, which was also located by the Walbrook. The site also is on a major bend in the river. It would have offered great views up and down the Thames, and since Westminster Abbey is thought to stand on the site of a temple to Apollo, the religious focus here also suggests something rather extraordinary, which the memory of which continued to attract later visitors. And then possibly traders to supply the people who were started settling at this site just a bit to the north, opposite the ones with the Roman scabbard side, just on the other side of the road. And the scabbard side is now accompanied by this 3rd century brooch, and the 5th or 6th century finds include a few sherds of pottery, part of a rare glass cone beaker with unusual pinched base and white trails on it, which might be from the Meuse Valley or the Rhineland, and a 6th century brooch thought to be from Tower Street, just to the northwest, adds to this picture of early activity here. Moving eastwards, in 2003, a cluster of 10 cremations, the only ones from the whole of Covent Garden, and were found at the London Transport Museum, and 8 of the 10 were in pots, handmade, mostly chaff-tempered, but 1 sand-tempered and 1 flint-tempered. And 3 of these were in the same pit here, suggesting that they might be a family group. The C14 dates are on the screen, but they're all probably quite early, 6th century at least. And in the pit was also 19 burt beads and an ornate pair of tweezers, probably Frankish and of 5th to 6th century date, which suggests that at least one of the group was a foreigner or had connections in northern France or Belgium or Germany. Cremation. Sorry. At the top there, this cremation was cut through by an inhumation burial. The cremation was dated to between 410 and 550, and it was cut through by a female burial, which had virtually no grave goods. But to the south of that one was an east-west burial, which had another female who was wearing a shield on tongue buckle, an amber necklace, a polychrome bead, imported bead, and a lovely brooch. That's the whole set that she was buried with. The brooch is a Kentish garnet keystone type, and it was found in a well that had cut through the head of the burial, so it's probably, or almost certainly, from the same grave. And taken together, these finds suggest a late 6th or early 7th century date for the burial. And although the relationship between the two burials is unclear, they're the best evidence for trade and traders around the time when St. Paul's was built in 604. So at least 25 7th century burials are now known, scattered along the area between St. Martin in the Fields and Drury Lane. And they form 2 clusters, the first one around St. Martin's and the other one we'll come on to. Whether the Roman cemetery at St. Martin in the Fields was reused in the 5th or 6th century is unclear. We could only look at the bits that were selected for redevelopment. But at least one of the burials found in 1722 had Saxon artefacts in it, in the reused Roman sarcophagus. And in our excavations, we found 5 definite and 7 possible 7th century burials, 2 of which are C14 dated to 660. And they include an important male who was buried with another palm cup, different shape. That's the original one from the sarcophagus. This is the one we found, both about the same date. He also had a hanging bowl, which was in very poor condition, but these are the mounts from it with beautiful inlaid decoration of a red enamel. He also wore a 7th century silver signet ring. It's in very poor condition. I can't show you a proper picture of it, but it's almost certainly an import and would be similar to the ones you can see on the screen. With it has the same bezel with round bezel with 3 pallets on either side. They're usually of gold or copper alloy, silver, but such rings underline the growing importance and power of the upper classes of the Frankish and Merovingian world, and they're important indicators of rank and the power to endorse documents. And given the C14 date around 660, the wearer could have been a port reeve or an official in charge of the development of the new wick, which we'll come on to. A few yards away from him, there was an empty grave cut, which contained some very nice female dress accessories, a gold pendant, Kentish style, silver rings, 5 beads, and 2 of them are of amethyst, and some silver rings. So very much the same date as the male burial. Moving across to the other concentration around the Royal Opera House, or Covent Garden Piazza, including St Martin's, there are now 4 weapon burials, all with spears and 1 with a shield. And another important burial, probably a weapon burial, but it was truncated, so we only had a small area to excavate. He wore a late 7th century belt set made of iron with inlaid cruciform motif, which you can see, and it's a type of buckle known from Switzerland to the Netherlands, with good parallels in northern France and Belgium, which suggests that he was not only a foreigner buried abroad, but had direct commercial and cultural contact with the Merovingian continent. And similar examples from slightly later, from Ipswich and also from Southampton. The Richard female burial in the area was found beneath the Royal Opera House prop store in Floral Street, and she wore a late example of a Kentish-style composite disc brooch in the middle, with some beads and some silver rings like the ones from St Martin in the Fields. And other finds are more scattered, but give us a picture of the type of things people were wearing. We unfortunately never had anything as grand as this, but we have a bead that probably came from something like it. So, when we look at the topography of the area, the reason for the location of the early Saxon finds and the main distribution of burials becomes clearer. The burials are mainly along this ridge of high ground up here, and apart from the focus down here, which is lower, but has a history that would have wanted people to carry on burying there. The real density of burial is impossible to ascertain because of later developments, even in the Saxon period, quarries and Victorian buildings. But it's quite possible the whole area was used for burial for up to 150 years. Where people were living in this early period, other than around St Martin, Upper St Martin's, we're not sure, but by the mid-7th century, the population was clearly growing, and as were trading activities, which were controlled by elite powers and their political relationships. And the revival of Christianity and the strategic location of the settlement also had a role to play in the growth of the settlement, which we think from combining the evidence from pottery sequences, coins, scientific dating, dendrochronology, was probably during the rule of Wulfhere of Mercia, who was king between 658 and 675. But it might have been through the later kings of Kent, or development may have continued under them. And at this time, the settlement appears to have been laid out to a specific plan. Occupation expanded, and here's one impression of what it may have looked like. Yes, question of what the beach was like, what the waterfront was like. The waterfront area somewhere is something that we have a lot of questions about, and there are excavations just been completed which hopefully will answer some of these, but I won't go into that. But it may have been a long beach, or it may have been a more abrupt revetment. But anyway, the development was seemed to be on to a form of town plan and expansion to the north over the burials that I've just mentioned. And this is quite clear at the Royal Opera House site, where here you've got a couple of ring ditches and some burials, and then immediately after this a road is laid out leading from the Thames to the north with buildings alongside it. there are also some wells and other features there. And it seems that the land was divided into plots, which seem to have remained fairly fixed from then on. The road was about 3 metres wide, in fact, and it had drains on either side of it to start with. And then there's a layer of grey rubbish that accumulated over these features that might come from the buildings or some elsewhere. In the late 7th century, there are more buildings. As you can see, they're not aligned alongside the road at this point. They have a slightly different alignment that is perhaps more related to Upper St Martin's Lane. But this changes. That this early development here has a courtyard complex with a smithy, and there's developing industry and new types of imported pottery arriving. And then in the following period, buildings start to be aligned beside the road. There's still some on the original alignment, but it's changing. And linked by alleyways leading away from the road to smaller areas and evolving into an irregular grid. Several buildings had hearths, and tanning pits were dug up in this area. Many buildings were probably multifunctional, with crafts taking place alongside domestic activities, and they probably had some livestock too. And this pattern continued through the 8th century with open spaces that may have had market functions, more and more buildings aligned along the roadside, but still the vestiges of the courtyard arrangement, more tanning pits. And this seems to have been the pattern for the 8th century, but by the 9th century there's a distinct increase in the amount of activity, and it reflects a decline in trading generally. I'll flip over those because I need to run out of time. So from the ceramic sequence, you can see chaff temper pottery starts at the beginning, and that's this peak here, and then Ipswich ware pottery comes in the early 8th century, and that's this peak here. And from these two specific ware types, we have been able to identify two particular horizons of activity in Lundenwic. There's a third one which has shell-tempered pottery, and that's much rarer. But the pottery has been quite important in establishing the chronology of activity on the Opera House site, and then being able to tie other sites into that. And imports are there all the time, but they fluctuate. The Ipswich wares are wheel-made, and they're much stronger than the early chaff-tempered wares, and they probably arrived as containers for goods, possibly wine, but any kind of dry goods as well. And their distribution might be something to do with Frisian traders. So coming back to the town plan, there's probably about 100 buildings now that we have evidence for, and the main area of settlement occupied about 55 to 60 hectares from Charing Cross Road across to towards the Aldwych. And then it's the road at the Opera House site was resurfaced more than 10 times, probably with gravel taken from extensive quarries to the north of the site. And the other quarries over by, you can see them dotted around here, by where the National Gallery is, and around this area. Then there's a shifting of emphasis in the later 8th century and 9th century. There seems to be development to the west. I already mentioned the important site at the Treasury here, and it's Westminster Abbey. We have evidence for activity there as well. And there's also a farm, which we have evidence for both underneath the National Gallery and underneath the National Portrait Gallery. And to the east, there seems to be increasing activity in the area of the temple. And this area in here is something that we really want to know more about, because it's very difficult to get to excavate in there with so many lovely standing buildings. So occasionally we get an opportunity, and that's very important. But we know that there's evidence for some burials underneath the area of the temple, but they couldn't be investigated properly due to planning restrictions. The archaeologists were just allowed to identify them and then cover them back up again, which is very frustrating. But there is evidence for trade. There's a whole wide range of finds, but including a coin that's probably from Quantification, which is near Calais, and there's possibly glass manufacture nearby. The function of most wicks was to supply the court and the church with goods and revenue from tolls, and we can see that, and there's also documentary evidence for various ships visiting the port in the 7th century and 8th century, and links to various religious houses that were using the port. And evidence of the waterfront I mentioned earlier so far is mainly around York Buildings near Charing Cross Station, but there's a new site which is at Adelphi Buildings just between there and the Savoy, which is going to bring us a lot of new information, and that's excavated by pre-construct archaeology. By 680, trade with Kent was regulated, and a royal hall was used by the kings of Kent to enable their merchants to have their transactions witnessed and documented. That might have been inside the city walls, but it was more likely it was somewhere within the trading settlement. So trade developed rapidly in the late 7th century and in the 8th century. And Lundenwic at this time was the port of Mercia, which didn't have a port of its own. So it was supplying a lot of goods upstream, up the Thames. And we know of a few sites where Ipswich ware and other imported things have been found. And the main emphasis of trade was in this area and along the Rhineland, but also Quantification. And we get a lot of quernstones coming up the Rhineland, and pottery coming along with them, and coins. Quernstones were used for grinding flour, as they had been in the Roman period. We get large numbers on the Opera House, and just about all sites produce some of them. And so at the last count, there were about 26 coins, including 11 shatters, which this is a typical shatter, mostly from London, Kent and Essex, but including some from France, Frisia, and one possibly imitating a coin from Denmark. And just an impression of some of the types of pottery. This one has applied tinfoil decoration, would have looked rather nice when it was new, and buffwares. And looking on to industries, bone and antler working was practiced from the start, but although offcuts are present on most sites, the amount of waste is quite minimal compared to that found in other trading settlements, such as Hamwick, which is Southampton. Combs, pins and weaving tools are the most common finds, but there's a whole range of objects, including a spoon that was from Upper St Martin's Lane that was obviously never finished and thrown away. Weaving was carried out on a small scale till up till about 700, 730, and then it suddenly becomes a real mass production, probably again due to the influence of Frisian traders, and we have documentary evidence for the exchange of black stones or lava querns for English cloth, which is this correspondence between Charlemagne and King Offa to around 796, which documents part of a long ongoing dispute about the quality of the stones and the quality of the cloth. There are about over 1,000 loom-weight fragments from the Royal Opera House, and they're found just everywhere. It clearly was a very important industry for the settlement. And as I said, leather working tanning bits on the Royal Opera House site. And also the Upper St Martin's Lane site is one of the few sites to have waterlogged deposits being by the stream. And there's a ditch there which also produced the only leather finds we have from the whole settlement: 6 shoes, some offcuts and part of what might be a purse. And it's possible that some Frisian women were taking part in the industry too, because we have some Frisian-type spindle wheels. Metalworking. The London Mint was the earliest and one of the most productive in England. We don't know where it was, but there is some evidence of possible coin manufacture in the 8th century on or near the Royal Opera House site, where there's little shatter-sized blanks and also ingots and crucibles and other finds, which suggest certainly some non-ferrous metalworking was going on there, mainly after 730. And a key mould. This is a mould for 2 different types of key, and a small key, and ironworking as well. And this is a mould for a brooch. You can see this is where the metal would have been poured in, and that's the mould which actually has a bird pattern on it, which I think is based on a coin, a type of coin minted in Southampton. And there were 2 possible smithies on the Royal Opera House site, but the distribution of slag suggests that it was mainly confined to, ironworking was mainly confined to the periphery of the settlement. Further evidence of daily life is provided by finds from cesspits and wells, and the latter including a variety of combs and a complete 8th century cauldron and trivet, both found in this well on the Royal Opera House site. Arguably the most personal finds are 2 items with English runic inscriptions on them, a late 7th to early 8th century handle or container. It's hollow, with it has a possible name on it, but I can't possibly pronounce it. And the other one is a cattle vertebra from the National Portrait Gallery site, which has the name Tatbert on it on one side, and other runes on the other side. In 764, Lundenwic there was a major fire, and there were 2 more soon after that. And although some of the 8th century buildings continued in use, only 3 new ones were constructed. There was everywhere there was a general decline due to political instability on the continent and the Viking raids that were coming. To what extent there were defensive measures in Lundenwic against the Vikings is unclear, but we do have little bits of ditch that could have been part of this strategy. The main one, the first one to be found, is this one here. It's quite substantial, and that's on Maiden Lane site here. And there's another one at the Royal Opera House, which links up potentially with a fragment of ditch up here and something down there. And then there's another small bit on the Upper St Martin's courtyard site and another up here. The one on the Royal Opera House site seemed to be fortified with stake holes, and it was on a different alignment to the buildings, perhaps part of a different plan. The fill was sealed by a layer of dark earth, and within the dark earth was a hoard of Northumbrian coins called stikers, which may have been buried at the time of or just after the second Viking raid of about 851, based on the dates of the coins. That the latest is King Osbert, who was 848 to 67. So it could be the 851 raid or the one after it. So the picture of decline in 9th century Lundenwic is somewhat at variance with its description in 811 as a royal town, and another of 839 which mentions an illustrious place called throughout the world the City of London. So it might be that people had moved away from the Covent Garden area towards Westminster or closer to the city. If they were moving back into the city, then they didn't take any of the types of pottery they'd previously been using with them. So maybe they sheltered in the area of the temple on the way, or maybe they didn't use pottery for a while. There's a lot of questions to be asked and answered there. But there's a coin hoard of 842 at the temple site here. And the last recorded use of the term wick is in a charter of 857. And in 886, the city was formally refounded by Aethelred. And these are some of his coins, which are now datable to about 880. And we have evidence for a market to the south of St. Paul's with a whole range of different finds that are coming in the late 9th century. But that's another story. So, just to sum up, those are the main points on the screen. But to go back to St. Martin in the Fields, it was clearly a very important site in its location. Maybe it started as a military posting station or lookout, but clearly it became a very high status cemetery. And stone coffins are really immensely heavy, obviously, even if they're floated down the Thames. They had to come from far away. There's less than 20 of them known from other Roman cemeteries in London. So the cluster at St. Martin in the Fields is quite remarkable, and the tile kiln does suggest maybe a temple or shrine nearby. While the fact that the site retained this religious significance in the 7th century might just reflect some opportunistic reuse of the sarcophagi, it seems to be a bit more than a coincidence and possibly a conscious desire to emulate a high-status Merovingian cemetery. So what we might be seeing here is something like a transition from a villa to a Frankish church, a pattern that's been noted on the continent, with traders arriving as a result of that and settlement developing from then on. While there seems no doubt that St. Paul's was located in the city from the late 7th century, maybe we should give some consideration to what was going on at St. Martin in the Fields in the earlier part of the 7th century, where there was clearly the community to use a new church. And I'm sure John will take that up when he talks about St. Paul's. Most of the burials in the Covent Garden area date to between 630 and 670. They show that the community was very wealthy, but that practice ceased. I think people were moving towards burial in churchyards by the time that the Lundenwic settlement was laid out as a planned settlement determined by royal power and influenced by the church and wider forces. So what I've outlined today is just one view, I think, of the whole story. A lot of information has been lost by past development, and things may well change again if we get another excavation in the right place. But now we do have a considerable amount of evidence from the 5th century onwards, and we can prove that, as Bede said, Lundenwic really was a mart or emporium of many nations coming by land and sea, and the events there led to the foundation of Lundenburgh in the 9th century and the growth of London as we know it today. Thank you.